Hello folks, and welcome to Saving Miller. So today I wanted to talk to you guys and give you a big challenge. You need to start your own homestead. So let's go through 5 reasons that I'm going to give you for why you should do this. So looking at us, we moved here in 2019 and we didn't really start our homestead for health reasons. But I think that your own health and well-being is the #1 reason that you should start your own homestead. Where we left a small house, it was not a big house, but a small house on a small lot in suburban California, and we didn't have a lot of room, and health wasn't necessarily a focus, but we really didn't have much physical activity that really needed to be done. If we wanted to go on a walk, we had to go down the concrete sidewalk and walk past other people's little houses on their small lots. Now, we did have a small garden, but it had a fairly small impact. We grew tomatoes mostly. They were great. We grew some peppers too. They were great, but it just really wasn't enough to get us involved. Now, we had a little more room. We could have done better than we did, but that was the reality. However, when we moved to this larger property, suddenly we have more room, and now we add animals to it, and this had a big impact on our lifestyle. And in that way, it changed our health. Like I said, it wasn't intentional necessarily, but at least twice a day, we have to walk out there. It's almost an 1/8 of a mile to where the chickens are now. So we got to walk out there in the mornings. We've got to let the ducks out. And then in the evening, we have to go back out and do the chores, making sure they have food and water for the day. Another shorter walk for the cows right now, but sometimes they're even further away. So every day we probably walk at least 2 miles just taking care of the animals. So this is not really an exercise routine, but it is. Now add on to that the garden and everything that we do there. There's a fair amount of just exercise that we get, moving around, doing things, working on things. So that was one big impact. It really changes us sort of on the outside physically, but another big impact is the food that we eat. So now we have an actual garden, and we have things going on. We eat the stuff. We put in these garden beds. That took a lot of physical labor, but then we started producing things here. We have harvested carrots, cabbages, radishes, red beets, kale, onions, peas, peppers, a number of other things that I've probably forgotten. And in addition to that, we produced 650 pounds of meat on that pasture last year. So this is now our food supply. We haven't purchased meat in months, at least 6 months when we harvested the beef, and even before that we reduced it. We do of course buy vegetables, but we eat pretty much everything we can produce here. Now all of this means that we're spending time out here, and this is the mental and the spiritual aspect of it. So hopefully you can hear it, but there are birds singing in the background. There are bees flying around. The hummingbirds are here this time of the year. Actually, they're here all year round, but we're in a natural environment. There's no roadways. There's no sirens and helicopters going on. It's a very quiet, peaceful environment. Really a place of healing and rejuvenation, a place of peace and quiet where we are here with nature. We're enjoying it, and nature is teaching us things about ourselves, about nature, and about how we should be interacting with nature. Now, I haven't really talked about this because it didn't necessarily fit, but to be honest, I've struggled with depression for years. And I honestly, over the past 2 years, it has vanished. And it has to be because of the homestead, because that's really the only thing that changed significantly. So I don't know exactly what kind of an impact starting a homestead would have on you and your health, but I can guarantee you it will be positive and you will notice. So it affected our diet, it affected our exercise, it affects what we see, what we think about, it affects how much less media we consume in terms of television and movies, because we've got things to do. And so the impact on your mental and spiritual life and well-being will be huge as well. So think about that. Now, the second reason I want to talk to you about starting your own homestead is the impact that it will have on the environment. This is really, really important, and it's kind of a big picture thing. It may be a little difficult to understand, so let's talk through this. Now, recently, well, actually over the last 40 years, but in very recent human history, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of focus on climate change and the environment and all these things that are going on. Now, regardless of the reasons, 7 billion people on the earth are going to have a big impact on the earth. It's going to affect the biome. It's going to change the way a lot of things function on the earth. You know, it may be greater or lesser, but there must be an impact. And so what we have seen is that species have disappeared completely. Diversity gets stamped out, and we have many, many monoculture situations, especially in agriculture. In addition to this, as we're stamping out the diversity, wastelands appear. Vast portions of the earth have been turned into a useless wasteland. Well, it's not actually useless, but it appears to be. And in addition, we cover acres and acres with concrete. Let's think about storms for a little bit, and they can be wildfires or hurricanes, whatever. But let's think about that. We care, and storms and natural events get a lot of press because they impact the built environment. And that's why we care about it. We are concerned when storms come and destroy our crops, hurt our buildings, whatever they're doing. You know, there's floods and they wipe things out, and they also affect nature. But nature doesn't actually care about storms. It really doesn't. It's part of it. Do you really think the Everglades care about the latest hurricane? No, but we do, because we think it destroyed the Everglades, or the wildfire that you know, cleans up an area. So nature doesn't necessarily care about storms and environmental changes like that, because nature handles it fairly well. But we care, and we're too impatient to let nature do its thing. So in many ways, we kind of take matters into our own hands. And this actually is one of the big reasons that you should start your own homestead. So let's think about the 2 acres of pasture that we have here. So this is the pasture that I can manage. This is the part of the property that I can care for. Now on this 2 acres, we have a couple of options, right? So we could build houses on here. Well, we can't because of zoning, but we could, right? Physically we could. We could build houses on here. And modern practices have new homes being built on about 5,500 square feet. So that's 8 homes per acre. And that means on, you know, roughly 2 acres, we could build about a dozen homes, leaving just a little bit of room for some roads. So we could do that. People need a place to live. Or we could use this in a commercial way as part of a larger plot, of course, but we could commercially farm this and produce, you know, 300 to 400 bushels of corn per year. Or we can use this pasture to produce a lot of our own food and surplus for our friends and family. So 7 billion people need a lot of houses, and they need a lot of food. But commercial farming simply isn't the answer. We are trending in a very negative direction in terms of the environment, and we've got to change something. This is what we have to do. We need to use our land to produce a variety of food in a sustainable way, using permaculture practices, using rotational grazing, using trees, using the animals to feed the soil, and the soil produces for us. In sustainable agriculture, we've eliminated the problem of runoff, whether it's soil runoff, whether it's excess fertilizer, chemical runoff. We've eliminated that because we don't use it. We've also eliminated almost all transportation. There's still a little bit involved, but we really are not transporting the food a long ways. You know, most of it is walking. So we've eliminated the fuel needs of transporting food hither and yon. Even for the neighbors, many times they would walk here to get, you know, a dozen eggs or something like that. Now, let's also measure the impact that a steer is going to have. Let's take a grass-fed steer, the way that we raise them here. We can raise a steer for 1 year per acre on the grass that we grow. Now, over that year, that steer is going to consume about 3 tons, give or take, 3 tons of dry matter. you know, about 20 to 30 pounds of grass per day. So that steer is going to take in the carbon from the grass. It's going to turn it into protein, about 500 pounds of very good protein, all produced very naturally. Now, the plants here, the grass, takes in CO2 from the atmosphere. It needs to take that in. It takes it in and it uses the carbon to build the grass structure, and it releases the oxygen back into the environment. So it's really filtering the air and keeping the oxygen level in the environment good. This is basic photosynthesis, right? No mystery here. Now the steer is also going to take some of the dry matter and kind of push it down into the soil, and that's going to continue to break down and increase the carbon content in the soil. Now we get to the finished 1,200 pound steer. Here's where it gets interesting. 100% of the meat and the carcass will be sequestered as carbon in the soil or in the earth. So the meat, humans eat it, we eat it, it's going to go either to a septic system or to a wastewater treatment plant. After we've consumed it, we've processed it, it sustains us. In the septic system, it's too deep really to be useful carbon, but it is sequestered in the ground, right? It stays there, it's not going back into the atmosphere. The wastewater treatment plant is actually going to break that all down, and it's going to essentially become compost, and in some cases fertilizer, depending on how it's utilized. But almost all commercial wastewater treatment plants use the waste that they produce. It becomes a very black, earthy supplement that they will use for roadside, for landscaping, things like that. So it doesn't go back into the food supply chain because of concerns about bioconcentration, concentrating pharmaceuticals and other chemicals back into humans. So typically it goes to fertilizer. So any part of that steer that gets consumed as meat goes back into the soil. The excess parts of the carcass, we can do two things. We could render it, we could take it somewhere and they would render it and they would turn it into fats and lubricants and various other products that that industry uses. Or in our case, we're going to turn it back into compost. By burying it in the soil, it's going to feed the soil. So 100% of that 3 tons of grass is sequestered in the earth now as carbon. And so this is the very interesting thing. Grass-fed beef feeds people and it helps the environment. It heals the environment. It fixes the grass and it is good. It acts as a carbon sink. Now, other livestock does this too, and it's important to understand the food supply chain. The chickens have a very positive impact. They help us to manage seeds and other pests, but their impact is a little bit different and can't really be measured in the same way because they do consume grains that are commercially produced. We do use good organic stuff, but that's the reality of chickens. So, if you build a homestead and you use rotational grazing and sustainable permaculture practices, you'll be able to have that positive impact on the environment as well. Nature is going to notice, and it's going to bring diversity. It's going to bring the animals and the bugs and everything. It's going to want to be there, and it's going to bring its help, and it will help to nurture what you're doing as well. With this, because you're producing your own food, you're going to reduce the number of tractors, the number of semis on the road. You're going to reduce the number of combines and other harvesting equipment that is out there. Very fuel hungry, it uses a lot of energy to produce commercial agriculture. So technology is very tricky and very dangerous. They think they can save the environment, but what they're doing is not making things better. They're just transferring the load. So an electric tractor or an electric semi is not any more environmentally friendly than the diesel one. Instead of the emissions, it's going to offset some of those emissions and it's going to put it into a mine in Argentina. So let's be realistic. You can't build the semi out of fairy dust in the air. It's still going to have a very significant impact, even if it is electric. What we really need to do is not use a better semi. We need to cut out the semi altogether. We need to shorten the food supply chain with your homestead from thousands of miles across the country, across the globe, to a few hundred feet on your homestead. That is how you positively impact the environment. Modern agriculture is always going to try to get bigger machines, therefore more efficiency, and they're going to use technology, they're going to use a lot of energy, and it's going to have an impact on the environment that is negative. Homesteading becomes simpler and more natural and lets nature do its thing to feed us and nourish us. So the recent disruptions that we've had to food supply and various other supply chains have shown how really fragile they are. So if we lose fuel or electricity, one or the other, not even both, our food supply is gone. We have no food in the grocery store. We have nothing to eat. People panic buy, they stock up all this stuff. This is because we are relying on large corporations, on factories, and dozens of people to do their job. Everybody has to be able to function in that environment so that the food can get to you. So we need to change the way that we approach it. Instead of eating all the varieties of food that we want all year round, we need to become much more local and much more seasonal in how we consume. Good food is not always available. Good food is seasonal and it is local. So I'm sorry, Canada and Montana, you've got to stop eating blackberries in February because that's not sustainable. That is not a good practice. We need to adjust to eating the food that is available when it is available. So for us, that means citrus in January and February. That means in March and April we have peas, we have carrots, we have cabbages and that kind of thing. In May and June, the tomatoes should be very productive. In July and August, we're going to have peppers, we're going to have cucumbers. In September and October, we're going to have things like figs and pomegranates and other sort of late fruit. Usually November and December is kind of slim, but that's when we're going to be eating, you know, the meat that we've produced and preserved foods and things like that. So we really need to stop demanding all kinds of variety at the very lowest prices because Big Ag can deliver this. But that's not what's good for us. That's not food security. That really is food insecurity because we rely on someone else. We rely on a giant global machine in order to get this done. So ultimately, grow your own food. Don't let Big Ag dominate things. Let's disrupt them and do it right. Let's show them the right way. That's the ultimate food security. Grow your own food on your own homestead.
Peas are good for you too.
Oh yes. You want an orange?
Thank you.
So over the past year, we had a huge opportunity to do the right thing. Unfortunately, I think we went in the wrong direction. People began relying more on the grocery store, more on takeout, and other negative changes happened as well. So when a small restaurant closes or has to close, and it was sourcing its food from a local farmer, we have two big negatives going on. We disrupt that supply. The farmer has difficulties. He has nowhere to sell his food anymore because the small restaurant is now out of business. In addition, many farmers markets across the country were closed. So that meant that all of us are relying on more food from Big Ag. So we really took a step back. I think there's a positive thing. If you're watching this video, you're probably part of the group that says this is a problem and we should do something about it. So here's my challenge to you. Start your own homestead or support one. Buy food from your neighbors. Plant your own garden. If you can't start your own homestead, maybe you have land you can rent out to someone who has the energy to do it. It's a lot of work. Maybe you can help someone else start their own homestead. We need a collective grassroots solution. We need people taking the initiative to start their own homestead and grow their own food in a very organic kind of way. We cannot let Big Ag and Big Food determine what we eat, when we eat, how we eat it. Let's disrupt this and change for the better. Here is the fourth reason that I'm going to give you for starting your own homestead. Do it for your children. If you're watching this video, you're one of our viewers, you're probably very similar to us. Between 25 and 50 years old, that's the majority of our viewership. And you're either going to have children soon, or you're going to know children that are in your life, or you have your own. So don't underestimate the impact that the environment has on a child. They have the ability to very quickly acquire skills. The skill of being able to recognize where food comes from and what is food and what isn't. We don't have a problem with them trying to harvest cactuses or trying to find food from a sage bush. They know what the food is because they're in this environment. On a daily basis, our 1-year-old is out here looking for food. So he'll pick peas, he'll pick peppers, and this is at 1-year-old. He understands where food comes from, and he can barely walk. He also will help to feed the dog, and he'll hand bits of hay to the cows. The mini farmer also knows these things, but she does even more. She knows how to find carrots, dig them up. She gathers the eggs almost every day, and she helps to feed the animals as well. And so before they can even go to school, they understand what cows eat. Do you know what cows eat?
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And what do chickens like?
Grain.
Yeah, they like grain and mealworms. This is all before school. They can be here, they can do it. Your children, all children really, should have the same opportunity. Kids learn these things by being in it and being around it and learning from their parents. So children should be able to see the entire life cycle, from hatching a chick, from planting a seed, to growing it, nurturing it, letting it flourish, giving it what it needs for its nutrients. They should see the harvesting, the preservation, the processing of food. All of these things are just built into our human nature in understanding what food is. Children will continue to develop these skills as they grow. The skills that they don't have yet, they will acquire by being in this environment. I just can't emphasize this enough. This is a basic life skill. This is more important than being able to use a computer. Being able to produce your own food should be the first thing that children learn. Not reading, writing, and arithmetic. It should be food. Now, most adults can, even if they don't have these skills, they weren't raised in an environment on a homestead, they have the ability to use YouTube channels like this one maybe, some informational, some inspirational, various other forms of technology that they can use to put together to grow their own food. However, adults are going to really make a lot of mistakes because this is not really ingrained in us. We're not familiar with how to do these things. It's much harder for me to learn how to do these things, how to care for plants and animals at 40 years old, than it is for the children to learn this when they're young. They naturally assimilate this, it's ingrained in them, and it's going to be there. So for the sake of your children or the other children that you have an impact on, start your own homestead. We as adults might not be that good at it. We're going to make a lot of mistakes. But then our children have the foundation to do it for the next generation. They'll be good at it, I promise. Start your own homestead. Do it for our children's future. The fifth reason to change the way we do food is for our society. Changing the way we think about food takes a long, long time. It took about 100 years to effectively destroy the millions of small homesteads and farms that were across this country 100 years ago. People grew their own food, they were very close to it. And very systematically over that time, we've lost the skills. We've come to accept that factory food is good because it's delicious. We have come to accept that the grocery store is the ideal place to find food, and we've given up on producing it ourselves. We prefer to try to make money to buy the food that somebody else produces. It all goes to Big Ag. So it's going to take a long, long time for us to really reverse those trends and value food appropriately and change the sources of our food. It's most effective for each one of us to just do it. You know, plant a victory garden, right? In the 50s, they had the right idea. It lasted for a little bit, and that's what we need to do again. So there is tremendous national security interests in people being able to produce their own food. So if you think about it, right now, our food supply is controlled by a few conglomerates. And I'll just call out a few. There's a few others, but these are recognizable names. ConAgra, Dow Chemical, Kroger's, Nestle, Tyson Foods. They probably have an impact on more than half of the food that you eat. More than half. So these companies decide what goes into your food. They decide the seeds that are used, they decide the chemical inputs, the fertilizer that's used, they decide where it's grown, they decide how it's harvested, how it's processed, they decide what other additional chemicals and nutrients are put into the food. They decide how it's priced, and they decide how it's distributed and where. They decide what your buying experience is going to be. Now, I don't want to imply that they are necessarily nefarious or ill-intentioned, but their focus is on making a profit. They're not in this for your health, at least not your positive health. They're not in this to protect the environment, and they definitely don't really care about your children, except making sure your children are dependent on them for the next generation. They're mostly interested in making a profit this next quarter. That is their priority. That's how they're going to run their business, because they're a for-profit company. That's the way they do it. So this all is a problem. You don't know the source or the quality of your food if you're buying from the grocery store. The only thing that you can do is buy it or not buy it. That's it. Now, I'll be honest. It's unfortunate, but locally produced good food is probably 2 to 3 times as expensive as commercially available food. Now, this is really painful, because if you buy 100% of your food locally, or where where it comes from and how it was produced, it's going to be very expensive. Honestly, that's not a realistic scenario just yet. But we can get there one small step at a time. Even buying a dozen eggs from your neighbor or selling eggs to your neighbors can have a huge impact long term. For us, we sell a few eggs, and that helps to offset. It doesn't pay for, but it helps to offset our feed costs. And that's a big help to us, that our neighbors buy eggs from us. So even those small things can have a big impact on our society long term, changing the way that we value food and identifying the source and supporting a source that we know is quality. So I really hope that our YouTube story will inspire you to do something similar. I've been really surprised at the effect that it's had on us over the past 2 years. Sort of what we've been able to accomplish, producing as much meat as we did and lots of vegetables, but also surprised at how big the impact is on the community. So we haven't been able to produce much of our own fruit, but what we did is bought locally from our neighbors who already have established trees. Within 5 miles of us, we found pomegranates, we found oranges, lemons, grapefruits, all kinds of citrus, dates, honey. We buy milk 2 miles away from a lady that has a couple of cows and a couple of goats. That's the milk that we drink from our neighbor. All these little things have a big impact. We, in turn, sell eggs, we sell some chicken, and we sell some shares of beef. And so that's the surplus that we're producing that others are supporting. And that's really important. The community together will change things. Now, we really want to try to get better with the vegetables. We want to produce more of our own vegetables. It's a big challenge, but we did decide to start with animals. We did this on purpose. We knew the vegetables would lag a little bit, but we wanted to start with animals because it takes a while to build a flock of ducks or chickens that is self-sustaining, where we can hatch from them, where they produce enough eggs. It takes a while to grow a steer. But chickens and cows also heal the land. Where we used to have bare spots, that entire orchard area was bare dirt a year ago. Because of the animals that came in there and ate the little bit that was growing and fertilized the rest of it, they were able to heal that. We have almost no bare spots of soil left. So in summary, do this for your own health. Start a homestead. Help the environment. Help heal our land. Improve your food security. Take care of your children. Give them a healthy environment to grow in. and help our society get back to a place where we've got the community, where we've got food produced by our own hands, good quality food that is worth eating. So that's the challenge I have for you. Start your own homestead or help somebody else do it. Will have a huge impact. I really wish you the best of luck in your endeavors. Saving Miller out.